All right. And we are live here, or rather, we're videotaping live, but you'll be seeing the recorded version later. This is White Lotus of Light, and this is our interview series. And it is my great, profound honor to interview Tim Hogan. Tim, so great to see you. Thank you for coming on the show. I just am a huge admirer of all your work and all the beautiful wisdom that you've shared with people in all your books. And for folks who don't know, I'm just going to read a real quick bio. Timothy Hogan is an author and lecturer, having published 8 books. Great books, by the way, wonderful stuff. He is Grandmaster of the Order of the Temple of Secret Initiates, Knights Templar lineage, and runs the Templar Collegia and the Martinist Order of the Temple in conjunction with that. He is recognized as a Templar Grandmaster in several Templar lineages worldwide, including the OST and the OSMTHU, and is a past Grandmaster of the OSTI lineage of the United States. He's also a past Master in Freemasonry, AF and AM, a past District Lecturer for the Masonic Grand Lodge of Colorado. He has served as a Master in many appendant bodies of Freemasonry, including the Scottish Rite and the Allied Masonic degrees. He is also a past Master in the Rosicrucian Order, AMORC, for the Rocky Mountain Lodge. He has been ordained as an Archbishop in a Rose-Croix church in France, and as a Tibetan Poa Bon Buddhist Rinpoche. He is known for his speaking at universities and U.S. embassies worldwide and for his Track 2 diplomacy around the world. He has also advised in the entertainment industry. Beyond this, he was a former candidate for mayor in Aurora, Colorado, losing by just 1 vote, so I'm told, and has appeared on television on Dateline, NBC, Nightline, ABC, CBS, Fox, The Today Show, and A9 in Istanbul, as well as on shows in Australia and China. And he's, of course, most proud to be on White Lotus of Light interviews. Right. Yeah, he has also had numerous radio and podcast interviews. And he is also a part-time partridge in a pear tree, just to kind of tie it all together. No, I'm just kidding. Tim, a man of so many titles. I like to call Tim the walking Library of Alexandria, the 2-legged Library of Alexandria. This man's knowledge just is broad and deep and covers almost every imaginable esoteric and occult knowledge that I can think of, or at least all the ones I'm interested in, basically. So Tim, great to have you on the show. And I'm curious, what are some of the projects that you're currently working on? You working on any new books or lecture series coming out?
Yeah, well, I lecture pretty regularly. I'm still lecturing, right this year I've been lecturing primarily doing Zoom lectures around the world, but I still do some traveling and speaking. That's good. I mean, but I've also been I'm working kind of off and on a book on some of the esoteric aspects of the New Testament that people may not know about, and some of the alchemical and Gnostic elements of the New Testament that most people may not be aware of. So that's kind of a pet project I'm working on right now. And beyond that, just been busy running the Templar Collegia and all the Templar activities associated with it, doing a little bit of traveling with that, initiating people, and I don't know, getting to do cool podcasts like yours. So that's my life.
Oh, well, what a charmed life. I was going to say how I learned about Tim Hogan was a few years back. I listened to one of my favorite YouTube channels, Forum Borealis, and the Great and Mysterious Al. I don't know that he has any additional name, but Forum Borealis is a fantastic channel. And I saw Tim's interview on, I think it's called Esoteric History of the Knights Templar, or maybe Secret Hidden History, something like that.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. And I was just really impressed with Tim, and so I got Tim's book. And Tim, it's the Way of the Modern Templar, but I forget the exact title. Can you
Yeah,
tell me that?
it's just Way of the Templar. I geez, I should know this off the top of my head. Hang on a second, I'll tell you. It's yeah, here it is. Yeah, The Way of the Templar, a manual for the modern Knight Templar.
Yeah, and that was just a beautiful book. I ended up getting that book based on that interview, and because I was so impressed. Tim has all these titles and so forth, but I spent some time with Tim. I guess that would have been 2019 for this darn pandemic, and Tim is just as humble and awesome in real life as he was in that interview. And it's just kind of surprising given this storied life that you've led. My understanding, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you became sort of initiated into esoteric circles when you were about 5. Is that correct? Because your family goes back to a founding father. Is that correct?
That's correct. Well, initiate. My first initiation was at 8 years old.
8. Okay.
That's when I was first knighted in a program. But yeah, I have my great grandfather, like 7 grandfathers back, was General Joseph Warren of the Revolutionary War, and he died at the Battle of Bunker Hill, but he initiated Paul Revere, and he was kind of the martyr of the American Revolution.
Wow.
And that history, he was the first Grandmaster of the forming United States at the time. And yeah, but hey, on both sides of my family, both my mother and my father's side, there's been a long line of initiates and friends, and since that time. And in fact, my grandfather, Hugh Warren, was the one who first brought me into Freemasonry back in, I guess it was been 1996 at this time, and that's when I was first initiated. I think I was initiated in 1995, and I was made a Master Mason in 1996. And yeah, but it's a long history. So.
Yeah, one of your books that I really enjoyed was Entering the Chain of Union, which talks about the connection that stretches back into the distant, mists of time of lines of initiates, and it's a fantastic book. Tim talks about a lot of the traditions among the Druze in Lebanon and other lineages where they have this initiatory practice. And that actually brings me to something I wanted to bring up that is in one of your Way of the Templar book, which is just a fantastic book for anyone who's wanting to really understand what were the Knights Templar about and what some of their history. Tim reveals some history that I had never heard elsewhere about Hugh de Payens. Now, please correct me if I get any of these details wrong. My understanding was Hugh de Payens was a member of Charlemagne's court. Is that correct?
Well, Hugh de Payens was he was. I mean, he was a little bit later than Charlemagne, but his family line was from. He had a Moorish family line,
right?
And he was. He had learned, he'd been initiated into some of the Moorish mystical practices at the time, which would be bordered on what we would now call Sufi practices. But it was Moorish sciences that were being passed down. In fact, his blazon, or his family crest, his family coat of arms had 3 Moors' heads on it, because that was his family line. And so he had that going for him. And then he was married to Catherine de St. Clair, who
Mm.
was she was of the Sinclair family of Scotland, and she was also the cousin of Chrétien de Troyes, or Chrétien de Troyes, who was the person who wrote the very first Grail legend. He published the very first Legends of the Holy Grail was Chrétien de Troyes, and he was Catherine de St. Clair's cousin. So Hugh de Payens had some interesting connections as far as that go, and he'd been initiated. He had studied um, Kabbalistic sciences under Rashi of Troyes, who was he was a very famous Kabbalist, and he was a good friend of Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who wrote the Rule of the Templars.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the original Rule of the Templars was composed of 72 articles, and it said that each one of those articles corresponded to one of the 72 Kabbalistic names of God. So that
Wow.
was directly tied in, and he and Godfrey de Saint Omar were really the two initial founding members of the Templar Order, and they had both been initiated. There was an order in Constantinople at the time known as the Brothers of the East,
Hmm.
and they had both been initiated in Constantinople at the time, and from there they went on to kind of do their mission in Jerusalem after they had been made privy to knowledge of certain buried artifacts in the Holy Land. So, the Templar Order, even though it was set up to protect pilgrims of all faiths who were going to the Holy Land, they were really what they were. While they did do that, what they were really doing was also digging. They're doing archaeological excavations under the Temple Mount and near the Temple Mount in East Jerusalem, and they discovered lots of cool stuff.
Yeah. So if I recall correctly from the book, you said that Hugh de Payens went looking for an esoteric society, and that he started on the Iberian Peninsula, which I believe was part of the Almohad Empire at the time. So it was Muslim at the time. And this was during that period of time where much of the Iberian Peninsula was occupied by Muslims who had come out of, I think Morocco was where their original sort of base of operations of that particular, I don't know if they were a sect per se, but that sort of, gosh, I'm trying to think of what the word is, but the word for like the kingdom for that particular Islamic kingdom, I think they're called the Almohad Empire. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, there was there was that, and then later the Ottoman Empire, which was based out
Right.
of Turkey. But
Right.
yeah, there wasn't all the different sects of Islam back then as
Right.
we think of it today. But yeah, there were. I mean, he had been raised in this Islamic family as he'd been
Mhm.
raised in, and there was back then there was a lot more of an influence on a lot more of an Islamic influence on parts of Europe than we normally acknowledge today. I mean,
Absolutely.
for example, just to give like a quick example, most people of European and American background
Mhm.
uh, are used to this idea of having 3 meals a day, for example.
Mhm.
Well, that originally came from Islam,
Hmm.
because the three meals were done in between the 5 prayer sessions.
Right.
So that was like one of the influences that had spread in, and there was to this day there's a number of particularly in Spain. You find a lot of words. For example, the uh, the marketplace in most parts of the Islamic world is known as the souk.
Hmm.
And if you go to, like, even to this day, if you go to like Mexico, for example, the marketplace is called the Zócalo.
Hmm.
Well, it comes from the souk. It comes from the Islamic name for the marketplace, which then, as it went through Spanish in Spain, it got called the Zócalo, and then from Spain it went into Mexico, and became the
Mhm.
Zócalo. But there's a lot of things like that. So Hugh de Payens he had been carrying that stuff, and then of course, the original Templars who helped him in his mission were largely all came from Albigensian Cathar families,
Yeah.
and they were Gnostics, and the thing that made the Gnostic mystics and the Islamic mystics, they got along so well. One of the main points was that, that in Islam, in the Quran, it says that, or particularly when it talks about Jesus, it says that he did not die on the cross, and that the people were taken in by an appearance.
Mm.
And so that's always been the main sticking point between Christianity and Islam, because Christianity in general has taught that Jesus died for people's sins on the cross, and that he rose from the dead. Well, and but in Islam they say, well, no, actually he didn't die on the cross. God would never, want anyone to die on the cross. I mean, it's
Right.
absurd to think he died on the cross. And then from a Gnostic Christian standpoint,
Mhm.
they also taught that Jesus didn't really die on the cross. They taught that it was a metaphor, or that it was um, symbolic of symbolically dying to the cross of matter and
Mm.
awakening to a greater spiritual illumination.
Yeah.
And so the Christian Gnostics and the Muslims got along fine, because they said, yeah, I mean, it's a metaphor.
Mhm.
It's we don't have to take it literally. There's still value in it, but we don't have to take it literally, that Jesus literally came back from the dead like a zombie Jesus. Gnostics said, hey, the word that's usually translated as resurrection is the Greek word anastasis, and
Mm.
anastasis just means awakening. So for the Gnostics, they said, hey, this was he was just awakening to gnosis. He was awakening to greater illumination. He didn't actually die. His lower self died off, and his higher self woke up to illumination. And
Wow.
and that seemed to work fine with the Islamic interpretation too. So Hugh de Payens, having come from those Islamic families, and then associating with the
Cathar.
Christian Gnostics of the Albigensians, that was not a problem at all. And
Mhm.
um, and then Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who wrote the rule, he was also secretly a practicing Druid. So there
Wow.
was this Druid influence, and that they were being exposed to. They were all practicing alchemy and studying alchemy at the time. And then Rashi of Troyes, or Troyes of France, was Rashi was a Kabbalist, which
Right.
was basically Jewish Gnosticism.
Yeah.
So you have all these
Thread.
mystical or Gnostic influences coming together to form the Templar Order, and Hugh de Payens he was he was aware of how the mystics. I think it was Louis Claude de Saint Martin who said that the mystics of all religions all speak the same language. And
Yeah.
it's really true, because they understand that it's metaphor and it's symbolism, and it applies to your personal journey, your personal awakening, and it doesn't have to be interpreted literally. So
Yeah, absolutely. And so, if I recall correctly, because people who haven't read your book, I think will find this very fascinating, and it leads into some other questions I want to ask you. Hugh de Payens started out going down to the Iberian Peninsula, crossed over the Strait of Gibraltar, went down to Morocco, and there was asking around for this rumored secret society or esoteric group that had advanced healing knowledge, knowledge of, I guess, technology. They might have not used that word, but something along those lines, like just ways that they thought that they could improve the quality of human life at that time. And just what I know that you call, and although I don't think he necessarily knew at that point, the primordial tradition. And that as he went across North Africa and went through, all across North Africa, and eventually went to Egypt, and then to the Giza Plateau, which its ancient name is the Tauru, the Rose Cross, which of course
correct.
leads into Rosicrucianism and all the rest. And there, Hugh de Payens was taken in and was initiated. And
It,
that's where he
it,
was given sort of the charter that would then become the Templar order. Is that accurate or close?
yeah, I mean, well, so basically that you can trace what Hugh de Payens was doing, and you can trace, if you look into the myths associated with Christian Rosencrantz or Christian
Mm,
Rosencreutz of the Rosicrucian manifestos,
right.
they went to the same places, and like, there was the myth of Christian Rosicruitz of the Rosicrucian manifestos was, this guy who had gone to all of these places like Morocco and like Damascus and these other places. I think they call it Damkar and the Rosicrucian manifestos. But yeah, I mean, it was all the same. It was all the same locations, and yeah, I was looking for lost knowledge, lost wisdom, and
Mm,
really what the Templar Order was doing. I mean, if we get to the root of it, of what Hugh de Payens was really doing and what the other Templars were doing, is they were looking for lost knowledge
yeah.
that was being preserved by different centers of activity, and then, in different groups, and we're trying to bring this back to Europe. And they were successful in many ways, because
Right.
it could be argued that the entire reason that Europe had a renaissance
Yep.
was because of the knowledge that the Templars brought back. And
Oh,
some
I
of it
agree.
was made public and some of it remained secret.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, and uh, what it links into, it seems, is and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but there were at least one and perhaps multiple ice age civilizations, one of which we
Mhm.
like to we like to use the name that Plato used, Atlantis. um, Graham Hancock and others have done a lot of work, and I'm going to ask you some questions about some of the American connections with the Atlantean diaspora, as I like to call it. But it was that tradition that started the pre-dynastic Egypt that
Yeah.
seems to be refugees from a lost civilization that ended around the time of the last ice age, and that the sacred knowledge that was held in that civilization kind of spread out across the world as whatever cataclysm or catastrophe occurred that ended things. I know there's very popular theory is the Younger Dryas impact, which they still say it's theoretical, but it's basically proven at this point that because of the
Yeah.
micro diamonds and the yttrium and some of the other things they found, that
And
really
the
only come
craters.
the craters. Yeah, it really only comes from like an interstellar object or an interplanetary object, something that's not, that you're not gonna find microdiamonds all across parts of the United States unless there was an impact to create those. And then I think it's yttrium and some other kind of exotic elements that you generally only find either deep in the earth or due to an impact. And you have the megafauna dying off. You have the Clovis people in North America being wiped out.
Disappearing. Yep.
You have what appears to be the creation of the scab lands. I'm very partial to Graham's theory. There's other people like Robert Schock who say that no, it was some kind of, I don't know, like ultra X class flare from the sun. And that leads into that stick man with stone thing, to where plasma entering the Earth's electromagnetic sphere creates something that looks like this object that's on petroglyphs worldwide. And so, there's lots of theories as to what brought down Atlantis. Some people say it was technological. Some people say it was a spiritual mistake that happened, to where something happened to begin to corrupt the spiritual nature of the people, and that caused the descent downward. And I think a lot of these things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, in that I think, from what resonates with me is that this civilization was at a very high level of technology. And later we're going to talk about the Hindu Yuga system. But that the Atlantean civilization, that civilization arose during what would be called the Sat Yuga, or the Golden Age. And that it was at a very high level. And then as we move downward in level of consciousness from the Golden Age Sat Yuga into Treta Yuga, which is the Silver Age, it was around that time of that transition, or shortly after that transition, where the fall of Atlantis seems to occur timeline-wise. And that's interesting to me because I'm trying to think, Edgar Casey, I believe it was, who talked about when he did channeling on Atlantis, and also hidden chambers near the Sphinx, which we're going to get into here in a minute. He talked about this arising of something that he called the Brotherhood of Belial, which was like a new, sort of more materialistic, really, spirituality. I use that term kind of loosely, but a more materialist spirituality. And that's when the Atlantis seems to have split into where some faction within it decided to use their superior technology to attack other people. This is where Plato talks about how I guess they would have been like proto-ancient Greeks, because we're talking 10,000 years ago, were being attacked by this civilization. And it sounds like the same thing. And so that lowering of spiritual consciousness, and that lowering of compassion, and a lot of the other like moral fiber of the Templar order as it's been reconstituted, it was the moving away from those elements of compassion and using technology for the betterment of humanity towards more selfish ends, ties in with not too long before the collapse happens. And I just think that that's fascinating. So my understanding is that when Hugh de Payens went to the Giza Plateau, he was initiated and given something like a charter to start the Knights Templar. Is that?
Well, he was given, there were a couple things. He was given what was called a fatwa, which from the imam there, who basically gave the Templar order authority to dig in areas that were controlled at the time by Islam.
Wow.
He was, and it should be pointed out too, and this kind of a side thing, but the in old Norman French, the word Allah means temple.
Wow.
Okay. So in a sense, the Templar order, they were known as the Poor Knights of Christ of the Temple of Solomon, or Templars, but if you were to say you were from the order of the temple, in old Norman French, of which Hugh de Payens would have been speaking, the temple would also be the order of Allah.
Wow.
Right? Because Allah in old Norman French means
Wow.
temple. So yeah, there was a natural kinship there. And you mentioned Plato. One of the other things that the Gnostics and the Muslims had in the idea of, the Gnostics looked to the writings of Plato,
Hmm.
and then certainly a lot of those writings were being translated by Islamic and Druze groups in the Middle East, and the Templars were getting these translations and bringing them back to Europe. But of course, one of the things that Plato also was known for, perhaps he's most known for, even beyond the Atlantis thing, is his cave allegory.
Yes.
This idea that what we're living in right now is kind of like a simulation, and that there's a real reality beyond this.
Mm.
And he told this metaphor of, we're kind of like all people that are born into a cave looking at shadows on the wall and mistaking the shadows for reality. And every once in a while, someone breaks free from the cave and goes outside and says, "Oh, geez, there's this whole other world out here," and comes back and tries to tell people in the cave, and they think he's crazy.
Right.
But to the Gnostics, they saw this metaphor as the same metaphor related to Jesus having been born in a cave or a manger, which would have been a cave back in his day. And then later he leaves the cave, or he leaves the tomb, and the cave or the tomb is declared as empty. So they saw that as, oh, this is related to Plato's cave. And of course, the Muslims had the same metaphors going on with the Prophet Muhammad. They said that, of course, Muhammad, he goes into a cave, and then he receives revelations from
Mm.
the archangel, who comes to him and gives him the Quran, and he leaves the cave and then begins to teach. Right.
Right.
So they saw it all as a metaphor. The mystics of both were like, oh yeah, this is just talking. This is a metaphor related to Plato's cave. And yeah,
Right.
but they were. You're right. So Hugh de Payens, he not only did he get the fatwa in Egypt, but then he also went to in Constantinople. He had been given, according to some traditions, he'd been initiated by the patriarch of the Eastern Church at the time, which was a guy by the name of Theoclete, and
Mm.
he had also initiated Hugh de Payens and given him information. So he had acquired all of these. I don't know if they would call charters, but they're definitely. I mean, there's a fatwa, but there was also um, initiation, was given information, and he could go back to the Holy Land and start to look for things. And there was also a connection, it should be pointed out, between what was going on the Giza Plateau, what was going on at the area of Baalbek
Ah,
in
Lebanon.
um, in Lebanon, what's now Lebanon, and uh, what was the other one? I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'm
don't
drawing a
worry.
blank on it, but basically there was a there was a there was a connection between these. Oh, and then what was going on the Temple Mount in
Ah,
Jerusalem. So these three locations were all early initiation centers, and there seems to be some evidence that advanced technology was used at all of them a long time ago in antiquity,
mm-hmm.
and that it was just, later temples were built on top of them. But there seems to be evidence of that Atlantean tradition that had been preserved in these areas.
And so just to recap, that was the Giza Plateau, Baalbek in Lebanon, and then the Temple Mount in Jerusalem.
Correct. Yes.
So
And you can find, these three areas because you have the megalithic, these giant megalithic stones at all three of these locations. I mean,
so Baalbek is pretty famous for the quarry nearby has that gigantic stone. Plus, they have the Trilithian, I think it is, or something. But it's
Yep.
three just absolutely like almost impossible to fathom how large they are. Stones that are part of a truly ancient temple that then the Romans later built on top of, and then I think maybe then Islam maybe came in and built a little bit there as well. But I know
there's been a lot of people that have built there. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
but there's evidence of people inhabiting that region going back to the Younger Dryas period.
Mm-hmm.
So it all ties in, and Graham Hancock talks about this quite a bit in his book Magicians of the Gods, and in
Yeah,
fact, I
great book.
helped orchestrate getting Graham in there because the whole region is controlled by Hezbollah now, which is a terrorist organization on the U.S. terrorist watch list. But fortunately, we had several Templar brothers and sisters who are also Druze that live in the area, and so I was able to orchestrate with them to bring Graham in there so that he could help study that region to write his Magicians of the Gods book. So
Yeah, and I'm gonna
that's the kind of the backstory behind what was going on there.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring up Graham later because there's well, I mean he's awesome. I hope to have him on the show someday. But he there was a very interesting article on his website by an Indian scholar about the Yuga system, and I'm a Vedic astrologer. That's my main source of income, and so I'm very fascinated with Hindu cosmology stuff. And when I first heard about the Yuga system, probably back in 2006, I was really fascinated. I was like, wow, I want to know this. And come to find out, we're in the, and I'll just throw up the picture here. We're
Kali Yuga.
Yeah, we're in the Kali Yuga. And that is, for those who don't know, the upside of the Kali Yuga, the good part is that you are able to, in one lifetime, become enlightened, so they say. But it's also, as you can see from the picture here of Kali, it can be a time that's very, very trying. You can see in the background, there's all sorts of chaos and war, and there's all the heads. And even though the deeper esoteric aspects of Kali is that she's destroying the ignorance of materiality by helping people to really go deep and indulge in that. And we are definitely in a time period of extreme materiality, and we really have been for the past 4,320 years is a pretty good marker for when things really kind of hit a nadir sometime around 300 BC, and then we've been on an upswing, but still very much material, very much in the material. And when I heard about the Yugas, like the Sat Yuga, which I mentioned earlier, which is the period that's the golden age in which Atlantis arose. I like this picture here. I'm going to share it's a nifty picture. It's not like any official picture of Atlantis. I think it's from Aquaman or something, but you just get that sense that there was something on this level in ancient times. It really seems. I mean, there's the stories of Vimannas in India, in the Vedas, where they had these flying machines and these great wars and so forth. There's traditions all over. Oh, go ahead.
Well, and I'll just point out that those Vimannas from the ancient Indian texts, like the Vimanaka Shastra and other, the Ramayana and the Bhagavad Gita and all these texts that talk about these flying machines. It's not. I'll point out that there's a correlation between the Vimanna from those traditions and the Shimana in ancient Sumer, which was also a flying device.
Haven't heard about
And
that.
then the mana
Uh-huh.
in the Phoenician and early Judaic Hebrew tradition,
Hmm.
and the mani in the Tibetan Buddhist in the tradition, and the mani that was also being utilized by the Albigensian Cathars that the Templar families came out of, or the early Templars came out of these Albigensian Cathar families, and they practiced a ceremony called the Mani Sola
Hmm.
ceremony, which was a communion, but it was based on this alchemical rite, and so it seems to suggest that they're all talking about the same substance. With the key word here is this mana,
Hmm.
and it seems to propel. It ties in both alchemically to certain alchemical um, elixirs and transmutations,
Hmm.
but it could also be used to bring about these flying craft. And
Mm.
hence why you have these different craft around the world named with this word, this article mana in it. So the
Wow.
Vimanna and Shimana, and yeah. So that's just one of the this is one of the things that the Templars were figuring out as they were traveling between Ethiopia and India and to the New World and such.
There was I forget what it is, but there's apocryphal text in that Ethiopian Bible, which some say is the oldest version of the Bible. It predates the Council of Nicaea, and it has several additional, maybe even a dozen
Mhm.
more additional books. And one of them they talk about something to do with like King Solomon, something or other craft that would like
Yeah,
land.
flying chariot. Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah, and
relating it to King Solomon. Yeah.
that's right. And yeah, it was the Kebra is the name of
Yes.
the
Yep.
text, and
Yeah.
it talks about King Solomon's flying ship, and he used to fly from Jerusalem to Ethiopia to visit the Queen of Sheba.
Yeah.
And what was Solomon doing? He was receiving he he of course had the Ark of the Covenant, and what was
Mm.
stored within the Ark of the Covenant? Mana.
Mm.
So so here's that connection
Interesting.
again, between King Solomon's flying craft, yeah,
He had some
which is
kind of
probably related to the Vimanas and the Shimanas.
yeah. So there was some kind of I can't remember what it was. It wasn't a caduceus, but it was some there was some object that was like it was maybe an Ouroboros, or I'm trying to remember what it was, but there was a object that they said was also in the Ark of the Covenant along with the Ten Commandments. I'm trying to remember what it was called.
A rod, there was Aaron's rod, and then there was also what was called a shamir, which was like they said it was like a worm or a snake-like thing that could cut through stones with its gaze.
Oh wow. Huh. Yeah, I mean
Yeah, so
it,
it seems like some sort of a laser type of technology.
yeah, and it's interesting because we were talking earlier about the evidence of ancient technology at these various sites, and what I was going to point out is that Balbalak, it's hard to argue with these just gigantic stones that are placed and cut perfectly. There's similar gigantic stones, especially in the temple complex there with the Sphinx. There's one or two stones that are just mind-bogglingly large, and of course the Great Pyramid itself is a peerless piece of architecture. There's nothing in my estimation that even remotely approaches it on basically any level. But what is the evidence in Jerusalem that is all
Well,
this high-tech kind of evidence? Because I hadn't ever, I mean, there's Jerusalem is so storied, just layers upon layers of history from three great Abrahamic religions and then so much more. And it was a holy
well,
site long before even I think the Jews settled there even.
well. I mean, you've heard of the Dome of the Rock.
Right.
Well, the reason why it's called Dome of the Rock is because it's sitting on top of two giant megalithic stones that are
Really? I
that are
did.
the rocks.
Ah.
Yeah, that they're laid into place, and they're probably around 100 tons each. And that's the whole reason why it's called the Dome of the Rock. And it's,
Wow. Had no
yeah,
idea.
so there's these megalithic stones that were there at Jerusalem as well. And I got, a few years ago, I spoke at the American University in Beirut with Robert Bouval.
Yeah.
And he had also, I'd spent time with Robert in Egypt as well. In fact, he was my outer guard when I initiated people in the Great Pyramid back in 2011.
Awesome.
But he, we had also gone to Baalbek together. This was before Graham published Magicians of the Gods, and one of the things we were looking at the time was in the quarry there at Baalbek. Of course, there's these giant, megalithic stones that weigh several thousand tons each.
Yeah.
But there was a team of German archaeologists in about 2000, I'd say 2013, who started doing some digging underneath these stones, and they discovered some more stones that were like twice as big as the ones that everyone could see.
Wow.
So it's appearing more now that like what we thought was the quarry wasn't even a quarry. It was just stones stacked on top of giant stones stacked on top of each other. But a lot of them had been buried over time. And so now they're unburying them right now. And the stones, I mean, the stones that everyone was aware of there weighed about 2,000 tons each. And the stones that they discovered that were underneath them weigh, by some estimates, as much as 3 to 5,000 tons each. So we're talking about stones that are bigger than houses. Yeah, we can't move them today. I mean, the largest operator machine that can move heavy weight that exists today is the platform that's able to move the space shuttle into place in order to launch. But this wouldn't even be able to carry those. I mean, it's so much more heavier than that. So it's really, really something.
So I mean, there's so much. Once people learn about just verified, indisputable evidence, it just seems like almost impossible to dismiss that there were prior civilizations. And I really love the work of Randall Carlson, who often works with Gran, and he explains like
I spoke with Randall, and I lectured in Minnesota together 2 years ago.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, no, he's fantastic.
He's great. Really fantastic.
Yeah. He shows that there's periodic cataclysms, and it's so interesting because, of course, a lot of the wisdom traditions around the world say exactly that. And it's something that was fervently rejected starting in, seems, the 1800s in geology and in other sciences. They were just like, nope, no catastrophes. Nope, it's this linear upward movement, despite the Roman Empire rising and falling. The fact that, one of the things that is so conclusive to me is if you look at Sumer and you look at Egypt, it seems to me like the most ancient stuff is the most advanced.
Yeah.
And how can that be when we think that there was just like people leapt from very
hunter-gatherer to like building megalithic cities. Yeah.
Rudimentary agriculture to that thing. And then they found that jawbone in Morocco, interesting Morocco again, which is way out of East Central Africa, which is where they say, they found Lucy and all that stuff, is where they thought for a long time that Homo sapiens sapiens arose. It's up here in northwestern Africa, but they date that jawbone at around 300,000 years old. And the thing that people have to keep in mind is that that's the youngest humans can be. Because, of course, for a fossil to form, it requires very specific conditions, almost always something getting stuck in mud and sediment. And the thing is about humans is that humans are much, much smarter than other animals. So the chances of a human becoming a fossil are much lower than other animals, because humans usually are with other humans. So it almost requires like some guy going off on his own, or he's in exile or whatever, gets stuck in the mud and is like,
All
oh
in a tar
shit.
pit.
Right, exactly. And so it's like we already know that just
Yeah.
fossils of really what we believe are really dumb animals based on like modern analogs compared to humans, are so rare. And humans must be several orders of magnitude more rare than that. So minimum 300,000 years old. And modern Orthodox history says we only learned how to stop, doing flint napping like in the past 0.03%, meaning 99.97% of all of humans' history that we were hunter-gatherers. No. What it is that the hunter-gatherer model is the most successful, sustainable model humans have ever developed. That's why you find it worldwide. That's why we find evidence of it going back tens of thousands of years, is because it's so successful. Whereas a super advanced society like our own, which seems like this unstoppable juggernaut, is quite susceptible to the kind of events that Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock talk about.
It's quite fragile.
Yeah.
Civilization is quite fragile.
And
I mean, people don't realize how fragile it is. And you mentioned earlier about the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, and then also Robert Schoch's theories with solar flares, and both of which are possible. I could tell you right now, from a genetic standpoint, it appears that the Earth may have been as populated as it is today, and then there was some sort of what's called a genetic bottleneck that happened right around the Younger Dryas time, where there was all of these different genetic variations that got reduced down to like just a few, maybe 100,000 people worldwide. And then from there, civilization regrew again. But if you look at our civilization today, especially as we start to move things more digital, there is nothing that we've built today that if civilization collapsed tomorrow, that would survive more than a few hundred years, let alone tens of thousands of years.
Right.
And I used to work do work, this is years ago, back in the 90s. I used to work for the space labs up in Boulder, Colorado. And one of the things we were working with the Space Command. This was the precursor to Space Force. But one of the things we were working on at the time, which was classified at the time, and now it's declassified, was a satellite known as the Advanced Composition Explorer, or the ACE satellite. And what this satellite does is it sits at a point that's known as the L1 point out in space, where basically the gravity of the Earth and the sun are equal. So it just stays in the spot, and it monitors the sun, giving us real-time solar reports, basically, so that we can have an early detection system if solar flares are heading our way. Basically, so that our military can be ready to like jump in and restore order in case all of our electrical systems are fried, which is what would happen. I mean, so imagine if there was a giant solar flare that wiped out all of our technology, right? So nobody knows how to do anything anymore because everything's digital.
Right.
But that's all been wiped out. And then we get hit by like a comet fragments or an asteroid or something. I mean, we'd be really messed. We'd be screwed, and it could take us another 10 to 12,000 years before we could get back to the point that we're at now. So it's not unreasonable to assume this has happened before.
Absolutely. And, that brings me back to, this is search for the primordial tradition. And I have a question for you. There was an archaeologist back in the 20s. I'm going to share this screen real quick, who he made a really interesting claim. And I'm curious what, if anything, you know about this. But he stated that the Sphinx was actually hollow. And you can see here, this is an old aerial photograph. There's a hole
head
in the head of the Sphinx, and there's other entrances apparently throughout the body of the Sphinx. And let's see, I want to find this other one. That's a nice, this one kind of has it. There's a chamber, and then there's a sub chamber, like initiation chamber. It goes down, and there's some long hall, and it goes down. And my understanding is that the Giza plateau itself is, and there's a picture from 1925, someone there in the hole in the head of the Sphinx. There it is, sealed up today, modern. Although I guess that's got a hatch that can be open. And so, can you confirm or deny that the Sphinx is in fact hollow and filled with initiation chambers? This rings true to me.
Yeah, it rings true to me too. I mean, I will say that the tradition has always said that, yeah, the Sphinx is hollow, that there are passageways that go from the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid itself.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, hang on a second. Let me grab something here. Hang on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so cool to just imagine, like, how lucky was that guy who got to see some of this supposedly. And he was even denied full access, apparently, by the government, the Egyptian government at the time. And they were nothing like the modern Egyptian government. And do you know Zawahi Haas, or whatever, however you say his name, the main Egyptologist guy?
The Egyptologists have, they've been looking at this issue for years. There has been a concerted effort to even cover certain things up. Like here's I don't know if you can see this.
Wow, I'm trying to look. Oh, it kind of froze.
This is a diagram. Okay.
Oh, I see it. Oh yeah, right there.
If I turn it sideways.
Uh-huh. Oh, okay.
It is a diagram of some of maybe I have to turn it that way. Yeah, there we go.
Oh, I have that picture actually, I think, of that one on I guess would be, you were holding it with your left hand. Let me see if I can pull this picture up. It's this one right here. Let me do a screen share real quick so the viewers can take a peep at that. I believe this is very similar to what you were just showing.
That diagram was created back in 1935.
Mm-hmm.
The Egyptian government had found some air shafts. In fact, you can see on the right of the diagram right there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when they first, supposedly they started digging down there, and they found a sarcophagus and some other passageways, but it was all flooded out.
Mm-hmm.
Which is reasonable to assume, because it is not far from the Nile River, and the
Mm-hmm.
Nile used to actually flow right on up to where the Sphinx is now.
Mm-hmm.
Once you start digging low enough, you're going to hit water table, from related to the Nile still to this day. But there's there's been explorations of things in the esoteric tradition. The Templar tradition has talked about for forever, that I'm aware of, this idea that there is underground stuff going on there. And that there were also other chambers in the Great Pyramid itself. If you look at my 2011 2012 publication of Entering the Chain of Union, you'll see a diagram of the Great Pyramid in it.
Mm-hmm.
And in that diagram, you'll see that I kind of secretly or not so secretly put in a showing where there's a chamber above the King's Chamber.
They've confirmed this now.
Which they've now confirmed. Yeah.
Yep.
So, but at the time when I was there, that wasn't confirmed yet. And one of the other things that I was privy to at the time is that there's a series of doors in the shafts. There's these shafts that go to the outside of the pyramid, and there was a scientist by the name of Gattenbrink, a German scientist who had sent robots up these shafts back then.
I remember that.
And discovered these doors. But what they didn't make public at the time, and which they still haven't made public yet, is the fact that on the backs of one of these doors, which they were able to look at with a fiber optic camera on the robot, they discovered writing, but it's not Egyptian. And that's a real problem, right? Because those doors had to have been put in there when the pyramid was built.
What? I have not heard that at all.
No, you haven't yet. I mean, you will hear about it in 20 years from now or something when the Egyptian government finally decides to reveal it. But at the time, in 2012, when I was looking at it, or actually 2011, I was there October, early November of 2011. We were when I was performing initiations there, Templar initiations in the Great Pyramid. One of the other things we were also doing was we were looking at this, this writing. There was a team of researchers, and we were trying to figure out what the writing was, and it's not Egyptian. So when Gattenbrink realized it wasn't Egyptian, that's when he walked away from the project because it was too controversial. I mean, the Egyptian government has an entire tourism industry based on this idea that the Egyptians built these things. So,
right,
yeah, it's pretty far out, and you'll hear about that in the future.
Wow.
But, yeah.
Well, probably a lot of you just heard that here first. Real quick, just to show the great antiquity of the Sphinx. One of the things that Robert Schock points out is this is weathering. Right. This is in the temple around the Sphinx, and there is an additional, here's another photo. And as you can see, someone did a nice little illustration here. That kind of weathering that makes these little lumpy rounded things, that doesn't happen from sand and grit. It happens from intense amounts of rain. And they did a calculation that basically puts the creation of the Great Sphinx back to when? Right around the end of the Younger Dryas period. Right. Based on that was the last time that there was enough rainfall in the area around the Sphinx that we know of in order to create that level of erosion. So, I mean, that pushes the Sphinx back probably 10,000 years beyond the Orthodox date, which is silly young, like 3,000 years ago, something silly.
Which it appears like 3,000 years ago is really when they were just doing restoration work.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Khufu or whoever it was right. Doing the work. And that's basically all we have is we have a stela saying that he did work, and people are saying, oh, he made it, because that fits in with their Orthodox history.
Right. Exactly.
It's kind of amazing the degree to which catastrophes and length of history are so controversial. The conspiracy theorist in me says that some folks in power know full well about all of this that we're talking about, and that it kind of attacks the underlying narrative that ties together modern Western civilization, which is this idea of progress, unrelenting progress. If we've been here before, then that means that it isn't always a linear progression. And what's more, if we've been here before and it went wrong, perhaps we are, fallible, and we might too have it. And so, if you allow for this possibility, it attacks this idea of forever progress, and also this sort of there is no alternative inevitability of the current trajectory of our civilization. And those are very important, like, core narratives to the West. And so there's just it seems to me that there's no chance on earth that the major governments on earth, especially our government, the United States government, aren't aware of this information. So if that's the case, the only things that the most banal explanation, the most innocent one, I guess, looking at it through the best possible lens, is something similar to the reason that we know why the Egyptian government won't do it. It's because the majority of the population of Egypt is Islamic, and they believe in a very orthodox reading of the Quran that puts the earth very similar to a Christian creationist theory of approximately 6,000 years ago, because that's how far back the sacred text goes. And so if the Egyptian government were to admit that the Sphinx is, 12,000, 13,000 years old, which it seems it must be, that would be very destabilizing. And that any government that allowed that might be overthrown the way we saw in the Arab Spring. And so that's a rational, reasonable explanation of why you might not want it. To me, it goes deeper than that. I think I really feel that it goes hand in glove with the 1800s. Just to get this out, the 1800s kind of change in English scientific theory away from any kind of mysticism. Whereas like in Germany, they continued to have kind of an alchemical and mystical bent to their natural sciences, but it was removed, and this hardcore materialist thing was pushed in there. And it's around that time when most of the ancient sites were being excavated in the Near East and Egypt. And so I feel like something around that particular decision making is related to this. And sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to finish that thought.
Well, no, you're right. And I think some of it also has to do with national identity. I mean, people, like, if your national identity is like, hey, us Egyptians are the descendants of the pyramid builders. I mean, it's a pride, and it's a form of national identity. And if like something comes along that says, well, actually, it may be that some foreigners came in and built this marvel that we can't even build today. It takes the some of the excitement out of that national identity and that national push.
And it's kind of silly in a way, because even if even if that is true, so let's say, and I believe it's true, of course, that it was Atlantean refugees, like Solon says, something to that effect. Well, more than likely, a lot of them settled there and married anyone who was living there. So they still are the descendants of the pyramid builders, just with a slightly different spin on it.
Well, it's such a silly thing. I mean, we're people, and some of it gets into unfortunately some racist ideas. I mean, people, the fact of the matter is people have been moving around the planet for as long as we've been around. And there's evidence of ancient explorers coming to the Americas, long before Columbus.
Right. Chinese emperors, treasure.
But the people who live in a region now may not be in any way tied to these ancient people any more than anybody else is. I mean, genetically speaking, they say that everybody on the planet is related, only going back 12,000 years. So we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of years. We're talking about only 12,000 years. I mean, everybody of European ancestry is related going back only 2,000 years. So we're not, that's a very, very small, period of time. And like, I get a little frustrated with some of these, like, for example, this is a little side tangent, but I get a little frustrated with some of these genetic testing, kits that they're putting out now, like 23andMe and others,
Right.
where you can test your genetic ancestry and find out if your ancestors were French or whatever. It's like, I mean, it's so ridiculous because really all you're looking at is a subset of data from a very short period of time ago. And if you just start going back a few more generations, we're all related. So and even beyond that, I think it's more of a scam to collect people's genetic information to eventually sell to insurance companies and the medical
That already
establishment.
happened. 23andMe, I think, was one of the ones that got bought out by some big biotech company, not surprisingly. So, yeah,
That's
no,
exactly right.
yeah, it's ridiculous. And so, Tim, there's a whole bunch more I want to get to, but I was thinking that this might be a good spot to take a break, and then we will continue. And we're going to continue in part 2, which may be released a while later. And just some of the things that I want to talk with you about in part 2 will be, I want to get more into the Templar preserving this primordial tradition, which does seem to relate back to these antediluvian civilizations. And I want to talk, bring it a little bit over to the Americas now, and talk about some of your information about the Hopi, as well as some of the Mayan Yucatan tribal myths related to Atlantis. That's really interesting. We're going to talk, I'm going to ask you about something that blew my mind. A lot of the Library of Alexandria was moved to what would have been, gosh, it wasn't Constantinople in those days, it would have been Byzantium still.
Yeah.
To the library in Byzantium, and then a lot of the stuff that was moved out of the Library of Alexandria before it was destroyed ended up in the Vatican Library. And Tim says that the Vatican Library for a while was moved out of the Vatican, and this was due to Napoleon, and that it was moved briefly into France. And
in 1810.
In what?
In 1810, Napoleon
1810.
captured the Vatican Library. Yeah.
So if you're a big history / esoteric nerd like me and Tim, you probably would be fascinated to know that information did get to see the light of day, other than, Vatican intrigue there for a while. And you don't have to answer now, but I'm going to ask, because I have to wonder, it's right in that time period. Is it related to Martinism at all? And does Martinism in any way spring from some of that material that came out of the Vatican Library and back to the Library of Alexandria, et cetera? And then I don't even know if we can talk about this, Tim, because it's something I should know. And I should tell folks, I am a member of the Templar Collegiate as well. I'm technically a Knights Templar, although I'm still a page, not like the Grandmaster here. But I don't know if we can talk about the vaults at all, Tim. Can we discuss a little bit of that? So there are a number of vaults that the Templar created around the world, some of which are even here in the Americas, according to Tim. And can I talk about the thing about the year that I said in the email?
Yep.
Is that too sensitive? Well, there had been plans. There had been plans to open some of these vaults in America in 2020. Then COVID hit.
That's right.
I mean, I'm not saying the two are related, but boy, what a bummer that you thought your vacation plans to Santa Monica Beach were important, that got disrupted. We had some stuff that might have really rocked a lot of people's understanding of history, understanding of Native American tribes and their deep connections to the primordial tradition. And so we're going to go into some of that. And then we're probably going to talk a little bit about Yugas and just Tim's thoughts on things like this huge. I mean, we're obviously in the midst of, I don't think anyone can dispute that we're in the midst of a global planetary change. And I'm going to get some of Tim's thoughts on things that we can do to try and steer civilization in a more charitable, a more compassionate, and more spiritually uplifting direction. and how that ties into the end of the Kali Yuga. So I'm going to go ahead and take a break now, Tim, and I'm super excited to get back for part 2. And so we'll just stop the recording here.
Sounds great.
All right.